Tonight I'm going to read about Suad, the mother of Sammy, who initially started out as being a villain in this story, but turned out being my favorite character ever. And so yeah, this is a scene about her kind of reflecting on her struggles with trying to control her son's life while also reflecting on the past that might have led her there. So here we begin. Also, I should say this might be the first time I'm cracking open an advanced copy of my book because I have been so afraid to look actually ever since I got them. I'm like, it's done now. I can't make any changes. So anyway, so please forgive any stumbles. Okay. Suad was having even more trouble sleeping than usual. Who could blame her? Each time she closed her eyes, she saw fire and chaos, scenes from the city where her son lived, unreachable. Not even the quiet of night could help her get rest. In fact, it made it worse. When night fell, after Aya went to bed, the TV shut off and the cotton wheel next door stood still. Suad heard the voice of the woman who answered Sammy's phone again and again. Could it be her? Months ago, when Sammy came home for a blip of a visit, Aya had found a passport in his backpack. Suad didn't know why her daughter had been in his backpack to begin with, but didn't complain. In fact, she was proud of her for caring so much that about her brother to take things into her own hands. And that she did. The girl ran into her bedside with the passport, waving around like a prize. Look, Mom. Suad remembered it clearly, the way she pushed her glasses up on her nose and said, "What's this?" The way she cringed at the sight of first a woman, and even worse, a foreign woman. The passport was blue with a bird embossed on the front. From the United States, Aya said. The woman in the photo stared back solemnly. She had eyes like a holograph, dull and flat from one angle and full of faraway thoughts from another. Likewise, she looked both young and old, depending on the feature, bareheaded and fair-headed, like a young girl. The tired, seen-it-all look of an older woman. Who was she? Suad needed to know, and yet dreaded the answer. She envied the days of the past when she blissfully believed that Sammy was studying when he didn't answer her call. Now she couldn't help but see the woman's face each time she listened to the phone ring, 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 and then get snuffed out by his voicemail. But someone had answered her call the other day. That was the problem. Suad was tempted to think it was that woman. Only a foreigner would be so brazen. But in her gut, she felt it wasn't. She could have sworn she detected in the faintest hint of Nile water on the breath used to utter that soul hello. It sounded too crisp, too easy to have come from a foreigner. Did that mean there was another? Oh, Sammy. He seemed to be taking after his father more and more each dreaded day. She tried to convince herself that all would be well, that he was a good boy, that she was the dutiful mother, but that woman's voice had followed her like the buzz of a fruit fly ever since. Sammy didn't know it, but she'd been working in stealth to correct him for many months. It all started with the passport episode. She never brought it up directly, of course. Just uttering the words would make her faint. But she hoped she'd get the message with just a few hints and nudges. It helped that it was Ramadan. She reminded him that it was a month of reflection and good behavior. Smokers quit smoking, the stingy donating to charity, fornicators kept their pants on, the wayward caught up with their prayers. Even Nagua kept her wild stories to herself, vowing to quit gossip each holy month. Girlfriends clearly had no place in Ramadan, and she didn't need to spell it out for him. To test him, she decided to surprise him with a visit. She baked his favorite lemon sponge cake for the occasion. Cake in hand, she took the train down to Cairo and carried it all the way to his dormitory. He wasn't there, but the concierge let her into his room with the master key. He was her son, after all. Normally, she would have taken the opportunity to go through his things, but something stopped her this time. Perhaps it was fear. God only knew what she might find. So instead, she just made his bed and sat there, waiting, until finally she heard the key in the door. By then, the night had come and passed. Sammy said he'd slept at campus after studying all day. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press further. He took her hand and led her to the Corniche, where he showed her his favorite spot on the river. The benches were crowded with teenage couples sitting too close, fingers ringless, and the air smelled strange, probably from hashish. The view wasn't so bad, though. The water was murkier than in the delta, but the river was wide and the skyscrapers cast reflections onto the rippling surface. Later, Sammy dropped her off at the train station with a spare key she requested, and with a kiss on the cheek as they parted. She couldn't help but be disappointed that she hadn't caught a trace of that woman. The next plan of action consisted of spitting girls' names at him like rapid fire. Ilham and Doa and Mariam and Melek, Naima and Nashwa and Lulu. Lulu's older sister Halima, no, that one was married, but her husband also had good girls in his family. Any male born to any relative, neighbor, or friend was fair game, whether or not Suad had even known of the girl's existence prior. It became quite ridiculous, she even had to admit. She had no idea whether any of these girls were indeed suitable, whether they looked like their pictures or prayed regularly or had reputations that checked out. It was only necessary that she be connected to Suad somehow, and most importantly, that she got to pick her. She spent many a daydream designing the type of girl she wanted for her son. Someone young, with many childbearing years ahead of her. Someone modest and loyal, uninterested in the silly internet rubbish like Aya. If the girl had any gardening experience, that was a plus, a major plus. She thought she had found this girl when she met Yosra, simple, young, uninterested in the world beyond lip gloss and silly cartoons. Problem was, Sammy wouldn't agree to meet her. So Suad brought her to him instead. She invited Yosra's family down from Damietta, coincidentally the same time Sammy was home for a visit. When they met, she scanned her son eagerly for any sign of attraction. How could he not be attracted? The girl was a genetic anomaly, with skin like fresh cream, eyes a straight azure, a bit plump by modern standards, but back in Suad's day, no man wanted a woman who couldn't fill 2 bus seats with her rear end, and certainly not a skinny foreigner who, even from that 1 by 1 inch passport photo, appeared to have the figure of a dried up chicken bone. But to her dismay, Sammy was alarmingly loyal to the chicken bone lady. He greeted Yosra no differently than he would greet a great aunt who would come to pinch his cheeks. They talked only of schoolwork and universities, and at the most excruciating moments, the weather up in Damietta. It was a particularly hot year, yes, hot enough to bake bread on the sidewalks. Suad was ready to pry their lips together with her own hands if she had to. After the house emptied, she phoned Sammy. She could hear his train departing as he brushed off questions about Yosra. Later, it came out that the chubby little Yosra was quite taken with the older boy and had told all her friends about him. Suad told her to give it time, and since then, that was all they had, time. Playing matchmaker reminded Suad of her own engagement so many years ago. She was the eldest girl in her family, and as such, her parents had a particular anxiety over her that dissipated by the time it reached the 5th daughter. Back then, she was just a girl. One day she turned around and had an enormous rack, the bane of her existence and the subject of all the local boys' whispers and giggles. She hated them all, except for one, Gamal the gas man. Gamal came to their apartment every month to fill up the gas canister in the kitchen. Unlike all the boys at school, he was tall and didn't have one of those awful prepubescent mustaches. He had a smooth face and a dimple on his chin, perfect teeth, and a flop of silk hair like Abdul Halim Hafez. He would smile to her from the street each time she came around, and Suad would wait for him in those days. She knew his schedule exactly, the first Monday of the month. Abu Radi was the last neighborhood on his route, and he'd reach it right after making the rounds in El Nasser and El Sadat. It would be afternoon by then, the unbearable, humid hours. After finishing her schoolwork, she'd wait by the window until she saw him coming, keychain dangling from his finger, sweat casting a sheen on his light brown skin, and she'd perch on the sill and wave, making sure that her breasts were pushed up as high as possible under her dress. It was shameful, but it was only for Gamal. She was sure that nobody else would notice until the day their conversation got personal up in the dark, hot apartment. It was the first time she baked date cookies all by herself, and she invited Gamal to take some home. He declined politely. A hot flush spread from her temples all the way down to her toes as she imagined that he must be married. She looked at the powdered crumbles on her hands and asked if his wife made them too. He said he didn't have a wife, and the words made her so happy that she broke into a smile, the kind of smile that's pulled so hard across the face that it hurts, the kind of smile that gave her away. Because in the other room, Tata was listening and knew exactly what was happening. She saw the smile. She heard the sing-song voice. She noticed the tight dress that she happened to be wearing that day, and come to think of it, every day that Gamal the gas man came around. Later, she cornered Suad. All the boys in the neighborhood are calling your name. Oh? They see what you do with Gamal and they think they can do the same. Wallahi, I don't do anything with Gamal. It doesn't matter. They think you do, and soon they'll all be lining up at the door calling, Ya Suad, Ya Suad. Not long after, she found herself sitting in her living room beside her second cousin, Mahmoud. She'd only met him at weddings and funerals, the kind of events that her parents had to drag her to. This time he came with a ring and a dish of baklava just for her. He was no Gamal, but he seemed okay. So she took the ring on her finger, the pastry into her parched mouth. It wouldn't go down. She had to spit it out into a napkin when he wasn't looking. Her mother scolded her with an eye from across the room. She wanted to scream. The time had come for her to marry, apparently, and nobody cared what she thought about it. They didn't even ask. She went on to wed Mahmoud and moved into the big house on the edge of town. It was outside of Gamal's gas route. She never saw him again, but his image remained as sharp and vivid in her mind as that day in the kitchen when she stood close enough to feel his breath. From time to time, she wrote Gamal letters, the kind not meant for sending, but for hiding inside drawers. Her first letter was sparse. She didn't know what to say other than, I miss you. But by the time her husband left to work in the Gulf, she had a flurry of news. She wrote of her lemon grove, her children, her regrets over marrying Mahmoud. I should have said no, she wrote on page after page, all covered with broken-hearted scribbles that Gamal would never see. Later, she realized that she didn't get married as a regular course of action according to schedule. She got married because Tata thought she was a slut. She figured it out with each successive sister. Nobody pushed plain, big-footed, studious Sarah to get married at that age. There was nothing to worry about with her. It was the same with Selma, who wore glasses under a too-tight hijab. Then there was Sabah, who cared only for baking sweets and going to bed as soon as the sun went down. But when Sana turned 17 and started holding hands with a boy in class, she was married off right away. Marriage was for the sluts. That's it.
Thank you so much, Leila. Our next reader is Gina Marie Guadagnino. Gina Marie Guadagnino is the author of The Parching Glass. She holds a BA in English from New York University and an MFA in creative writing from the New School. Her work has appeared in the Morris-Jumel, Manson Anthology, Fantasy and Paranormal Fiction, and Mixed Up, Cocktail Recipes and Flash Fiction for the Discerning Drinker and Reader. Please welcome Gina Marie.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to read the first chapter from my novel, The Parting Glass. It takes place in New York in 1837, mostly in and around the Washington Square area, where I go to school and work currently at NYU, and I miss very much doing every day. So I'm just going to start and read chapter 1. And each chapter has an epigram from an actual manual for servants from the 19th century called The Duties of a Lady's Maid, because our main character is a lady's maid to a debutante who lives in Washington Square. So I'll just dive right in. In some families, there are secrets on which the welfare and perhaps the very existence of the persons concerned may depend. The Duties of a Lady's Maid. Washington Square, 1837. It was Thursday again, and once more I was courting misery with both arms open wide. Thank you, Ballard, that will do, Miss Charlotte Walden said, and bobbing a curtsy, I showed myself quickly from the room. The heavy oak door shut solidly, with a soft click following as the lock was engaged. The argand lamps threw but dim illumination along the heavy carpet lining the hall, casting flickering shadows amongst the birds and flowers woven there. I made my way along the muffled corridor to the door that led into the servants' stair. On the landing was the door to my own narrow chamber. I pressed myself to this barrier, one ear flat against the wood. Through the door, I could only just make out the muffled scrape of the window opening in the room beyond. It was all so faint, and in the faded light on the landing, almost dreamlike. I let my forehead rest against the door, my eyes closed. I strained for the sound of the bed, imagining its creaking coming through the door as a whisper, once, twice, again. Quick footfalls broke my reverie, and I lurched from the door as Mrs. Harrison came up the stair. I froze, my ears still straining, but the heavy oak door was my mistress's shield. One hand went up involuntarily to see my hair was straight, and I nodded to the imposing housekeeper. Miss Ballard, is it not your night off? Yes, Mrs. Harrison, Mum. Is Miss Walden abed and all your duties discharged? She asked, her face placid, her tone bland. Indeed they are, Mrs. Harrison. Then I see no cause for you to linger when you might very well go. Yes, thank you, Mum. Beneath Mrs. Harrison's critical eye, I hurried down the back stairs to the kitchen. I stopped on the landing to arrange my face into a mask of tranquility before I faced cook. Night off, Miss Ballard? The big woman asked, as though she didn't already know the answer. Yes, Mrs. Friedman, Mum. Bit of a snack for you then, child. She gestured at a small parcel with the knife she held. Right then, off with you. Mrs. Friedman, brusque with everyone, always took the time to show me kindness in her own harsh way. She was under no obligation to feed me extra on my night off, but she often did it anyway, suspicious in that chronic way of cooks that I was not adequately fed unless she was doing the feeding. All skin and bones, that one, I heard her mutter as she returned to her chopping. See you bundle well, child, she said, raising her voice again. It's turned snowy. I huddled into my wool mantle, tying my bonnet firmly under my chin. No mitts or gloves had I, but only Charlotte Walden's muff from 4 seasons ago, the fur patchy and worn near to the skin. Thus attired, I nodded farewell to cook and slipped out the kitchen door. I made my way down the snowy cobbles to the gate at the end of the mews, should anyone be watching from the window, then doubled back along the other side of the block and ducked into the street door into our own carriage house. The horses nickered softly, cold air gusting down the row of stalls from the open door. Moonlight and street lamps lit my way across the flagstones to the Walden's coach, black and hulking. The door stuck a little as I opened it and crawled in to sit on the floor. I breathed in deeply the smells of the carriage house. Sweet hay and oat mash, worn leather, brass polish, and the musky scent of horse, such aromas as had clung to my father. I opened cook's parcel to nibble on my portion of bread and cheese, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Licking my fingers, brushing the crumbs from my skirt, I settled in to wait. It was nearly pitch dark when Shawneen arrived, the street lamps having guttered low. I had dozed off with my head on the carriage seat, but woke at once when he touched my arm. In the wan light, he smiled, his eyes gleaming. I smiled back, took his glove, and let him hand me down from the coach like the lady I'd never be. Softly, so our boots wouldn't ring on the flagstones, we slipped out the carriage house's front door onto the street. A clock struck 1 over at St. Mark's as we made our way out west onto Broadway. A sudden gust as we rounded the corner threw me off balance. I moved into the proffered circle of his arm, huddling coat close against him. A light snow fell, swirling in eddies over the cobbles, and I gripped his arm to keep from slipping on the shell of ice formed over the street. The houses and shops that lined the way were dark, silent, and we had gone several blocks south before we saw lights dancing behind curtained windows and either of us dared speak. "Have you eaten?" he asked me quietly in Irish. "I have," I whispered back. "Have you?" "I ate, but I'm not yet satisfied." He smiled wickedly and I shoved him, grinning in spite of myself. We crossed over Houston and down to one of the narrow side streets, a swell of light and noise rising to meet us as we came to Lafayette. Warm light and capering shadows thrown from the windows of public houses and dance halls stained the snow, a mix of song and laughter escaping from behind the doors. The Hibernian stood on Mulberry Street, on a block crammed full of public houses and a handful of the more respectable sorts of brothels. Like its neighbors, it catered almost exclusively to Irish, though one might find the rare Italian or Prussian who'd wandered north out of the Sixth Ward, the borders of which were still contained to the south. It was already all Catholics then in Mulberry Street, but the Hibernian was full of lilting voices from every corner of the island. Here, Broadway vowels rubbed up against rapid Belfast chatter and clipped Dublin drawl. And from behind the bar, his heavy brogue booming over the din, reigned Dermot John O'Brien, proprietor and publican, who nodded at us as we entered. We nodded back, weaving our way through the patrons packing the place. At a cramped bench in the back, I waited while Shawneen sidled up to the bar. When he returned, he held 2 mugs in each hand, foam streaming down the sides. I had slipped off my bonnet and mantle, my face flushed from the heat of the room, and reaching for one of the mugs, gulped down half its contents in one swig. "Easy now," he said, speaking English this time. "It'll go straight to your head." "Fuck it, Johnny," I said, using his English name. I took another swallow, having by now dropped the posh accent I adopted in the Waldens' home and slipping back into my native brogue. "Just because you're buying, there's no call to be an ass." He spread his hands in a defenseless sort of gesture that I had been growing lately to despise. I turned my eyes back to my ale, scowling. He was always a great one for ruining a moment. My temper up, we drank then in silence. The amber firelight from the hearth seemed to suffuse the amber liquid in my mug. From time to time, I saw him nod or say a word in acknowledgement of other patrons, men I recognized as friends of his, but I kept my eyes firmly on my ale, stubbornly refusing to meet anyone's gaze. At last, he sighed loudly. "What now?" He shrugged with exaggerated casualness. "Might go meet the lads if you weren't feeling social. It's all the same to me." "Grand," he said, clinking his glass cockily to mine and sauntering into the press towards the knot of his cronies. I relocated to the bar in the hopes of engaging Dermot in a lengthy discourse on Shawneen's many faults, but the bustle kept him moving up and down the counter, too busy refilling mugs with ale and topping off glasses of whiskey to do more than keep my own mug filled, and shrug apologetically at me as he moved on to less sullen patrons. I counted 7 rounds before the room began to blur and sway, light and laughter swirling like the gustings of snow that still fell before a sudden smack of cold stung my cheeks. Shawneen was holding my shoulders firmly as I retched in the alley behind the Hibernian, the icy wind sobering. I shook his arm from my shoulders, pushing past him back into the pub. Weaving between the scattered remaining patrons, I made my way to the stairs at the back of the bar, sketching a rough salute to Dermot as I passed him. He reached out to steady me as I swayed, but I waved him off, leaning heavily against the wall for balance. I descended, making my way past the kegs and casks to a double pallet spread out by the hearth. I could hear Shawneen hurrying behind me and sat, legs splayed, waiting for him on the pallet. My braid had come down, uncoiling over my shoulder, which I noted in a detached sort of way as I allowed him to remove my boots and stockings. I bent forward, nose to my knees, and waited for him to unbutton me enough to slide my frock over my head. I felt his fingers clumsily picking at the knots in my stays and moved to help him unlace me. I was shivering then, clad only in my thin shift, lying back onto the pallet, my eyes closed as I listened to him move about the room. I heard him building up the fire, felt him sit heavily onto the pallet beside me, pulling the layers of blankets up around me to stop me shivering. I rolled over on my side and took his hand, pressing it gratefully to my cheek. I squeezed his fingers, inhaling the perfumed hair oil of Charlotte Walden, who only hours before had lain with him in her bed. Shawneen retrieved his hand, brushing a stray hair back from my face and saying in Irish, "There now, little Mara, what did I say about all that drink?" "Hell with it, Shawneen," I said in our father's language. "There'll be time to regret it all in the morning." "Go to sleep, sister," he whispered, kissing my brow before heading back up the stairs. But I was already drifting off. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina Marie. Our last reader for the night is Rachel Lyon. Rachel is the author of Self-Portrait with a Boy, which was longlisted for the Center of Fiction's 2018 First Novel Prize and the 2020 International Dublin Literary Award. Her short work has appeared or is forthcoming in publications including One Story, Longreads, Joyland, and Electric Literature. Editor-in-chief of Epiphany magazine and co-founder of the reading series Ditmas Lit, Rachel has taught at Catapult, the Sackett Street Writers Workshop, Slice Literary, and elsewhere. She lives in Brooklyn, her hometown. Please welcome Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and it's such a pleasure to read alongside you guys, Gina Marie and Leila. I'm gonna be a nerd and set my timer because I'm afraid about going over. As a reading series co-host, I know how annoying that can be. So I'm going to read from this piece, which came out in One Story a couple of months ago. You'll know when it's time. Once the cat died, she would move to Delaware. That was the plan. She'd been doing some research and found a lovely little retirement community on the water. It got humid in the summers and the shores were prone to flooding. And once during hurricane season the summer before last, the town had to evacuate and they spent 2 full nights lined up in sleeping bags on the floor of the high school gymnasium. But everywhere had weather now. In Delaware, the beaches were pretty. It didn't get too cold in the winter. The real estate was affordable. The county had a nice library with good programming, a book club, movie nights, soul collage, and a charming young African-American Democratic mayor. There was a robust recycling plant and a family-owned diner and a quilting museum. Though none of that mattered, not really. The main thing was she had to get out of Farmington. She'd been here 35 years, though it hardly felt as if she was that woman who'd been here so long anymore. The woman who'd lived here shared her name, Ida, and her voice, and her childhood, and some of her wardrobe, but that Ida was, if not happily, at least uneventfully married. That Ida was a little overweight, sure, but in a cute way, more or less. That Ida had a kid and a job and a small, thriving menagerie, not just the cat, but a couple of dogs, her daughter's guinea pig, and 2 illegal sugar gliders. That Ida volunteered at the church. This Ida was a fat, retired, divorced empty nester with no living creatures to keep her company except the one currently yowling in the pantry. She avoided church because Greg still went there with his new girlfriend. She'd even deleted Facebook after seeing a picture of Greg with the new girlfriend and the 2 dogs, and now she couldn't figure out how to reinstall it. She was really alone. The previous plan had been Florida, but her daughter Celeste talked her out of it. Plaintively, over the phone. "Don't move to Florida, Mom. It's so gauche." Gauche? Ida had laughed. Where did Celeste come up with this stuff? When she was a little boy, she had always taken her mother's side. Now that she was, in her words, a grown-ass woman, with a respectable job and a long-term girlfriend and even a mortgage, she was full of opinions. It was painful sometimes to think of the child Celeste had been. Painting, dancing, asking startling questions, hiding for hours in the laundry room. A fearful boy, and if Ida was honest with herself, which she was, if rarely, in uncomfortable moments, usually in the dark, She'd liked him that way, liked how he trusted her completely. How to square that kid with the snide, willowy bombshell she was now. Even the name she'd given herself, Celeste, it sounded like make-believe, like a name you'd come up with in a fever dream. Children weren't expected to name themselves. They were expected to accept the name their parents gave them and spend their lives growing into or out of or around its various associations. Then again, they were also expected to accept and deal with the gender they were born with, so what did Ida know? She didn't really need to go to Florida, per se. Really, she just wanted to go inside this one calendar page, November of 2014, one of 12 reproductions in a fine art-themed calendar she'd gotten for free from the bank. The painting reproduced for November was called St. Augustine, and she just loved it. She wanted to get very small and two-dimensional, and somehow inside of it, or at least inside somewhere like it, a place where the boundaries between this and that were fuzzy, brushy, and malleable, where space itself was shallow, and everything, even the night sky, was shades of pastel. Getting the cat into the pet carrier was an hour-long process. Just because he was dying didn't mean he wasn't still sprier than she was. She had to chase him into the dining room, close all the doors, and, out of breath, corner and throw a blanket over him. He was frail and loud. His meow was unbearable. It actually crackled, as if broadcast through him over radio waves from 100 miles away. She shoved him into the carrier, alternately cursing him and apologizing, and drove with him on the floor at the foot of the passenger seat. In an attempt to ignore his heinous wailing, she turned on the radio. Over news of relief efforts in Indonesia, she told him, "It'll be okay. It won't be much longer now." She wasn't sure if she meant the drive or his life. "Boy or girl?" asked the teenager behind the intake desk. "Cat," said Ida. "LOL," said the kid without smiling. "Male or female?" Ida squinted at the child. They themselves were of indeterminate gender, perfectly smooth skin and facial piercings and sunset-colored hair. Before the Precious Moments animal calendar and the boxes of urinary tract health kibble, a vision manifested, Celeste at 14, crying inconsolably after one of the idiot Buzzle kids called her a faggot. "Does it matter?" said Ida. The kids smiled, what looked like their first smile all day. "Not really," they said. "Age?" "Ancient. Gosh, let me think." Celeste had found him back when she was still in high school, a little black kitten mewling pitiably in a bag of trash outside the Denny's off of Route 2. 15, 16, Ida guessed. "Aw," said the kid to the cat carrier. "You're an old one, aren't you? Name?" Ida balked. Strangely, embarrassingly, she realized she'd forgotten. She was angry at him, that's why. He was getting in the way of Delaware. She looked at him through the mesh of the carrier there on the counter. The carrier was black, and the shadow inside was black, and he was black too. She could barely see him. "Augustine," she said. There were several vets who worked at the Farmington Animal Hospital. The one she got today was a portly 50-something Indian woman with sad, dark eyes. She touched the cat gingerly, murmuring, intimate. Even so, the cat let out a horrible, choked meow. "Has his behavior changed at all?" the vet asked. "Completely," said Ida. She thought she might elaborate, but found she didn't have the energy. Used to be he'd lie in her lap while she and Greg watched TV. Now he wouldn't be touched. Used to be he'd drink from her palm while she and Greg were brushing their teeth at the bathroom sink. Now he wouldn't drink at all. Used to be he'd go out in the garden and sit stiff as a sentry on the sun-warmed flagstone, ears maneuvering like little satellites while Greg slept in a lawn chair, his pale skin burning pink. Now when the cat went out back, he crawled under the shrubbery and spent hours just lying there in the dirt. He was brought into another room for tests. Ida sat and passed the time by studying the yellow instructional poster on the wall. It was titled Catitudes, Cat Body Language Decoded. Below the title, a subheading read, The Telltale Tale. A grid of illustrations showed cats' rear ends in varying degrees of distress. Her own cat, apparently, vacillated between agitated and scared, his tail angled low as a divining rod. Anne came over for a cup of tea and to catch Ida up on church gossip. There was a new minister now, some young guy from Canada. You should have seen how they swarmed on him after his sermon, Anne said, standing by the kitchen island. Patty and Nancy and Felicia, all of them. I don't miss that place, said Ida, and she was pleased to find it was true. She didn't. How was the sermon? Anne held her mug of Earl Grey in both hands, as if it were cold in the house, which it wasn't. Oh, it was wonderful. All about the earthquake in Palu. Ida nodded. She'd half heard something about this on the radio. God works in mysterious ways and all that, I suppose. Didn't bring God into it at all, actually, said Anne. More like our fellow men and women, etc. He's collecting donations. If you have any canned goods, I can take them over. Ida got up on the step stool and opened a cabinet full of nonsense items. Corned beef. How long had she had a tin of corned beef? She put it on the counter and began a small collection. As Anne watched her, Ida became uncomfortably aware of the way the step stool creaked under her weight. Have you talked to Greg at all? Anne asked. Have I ever eaten an artichoke heart? Said Ida. Anne didn't take the hint. He brought her to the fundraising dinner, she said regretfully. Anne delivered all of her gossip regretfully. What was the theme this year? Ida asked. Vikings. Ida laughed, thinking of Greg and his girlfriend and all the other middle-aged Unitarians with horns on their heads eating macaroni salad. They bought $200 worth of couples massage tickets at the raffle, Anne told her. An unwelcome mental image. Greg's thick body beside the new girlfriend's thick body, both of them grunting with pleasure under the pressure of two pairs of strange hands. I'm sorry, Anne said, I shouldn't tell you these things. Do Indonesians eat cornichons? Ida said. Cornichons, beef, beans, marinara, corned beef. The collection was becoming disgusting. It's just, Ida said after a minute, allowing herself a little self-pity. I don't know how he ended up with the new girlfriend and all the friends. And the dogs, added Anne, rather cruelly. The cat walked into the kitchen and yowled. Ida got down and tried to pet him. He cowered and hissed. She poured him some kibble. He attempted to bury it in the linoleum. What the hell does he want? She said, exasperated. He wanted to trade you in for a newer model, said Anne. Not Greg, Ida snapped. The cat. Anne looked away, chastened. Anyway, Ida said, opening the back door for the awful creature, if a newer model was what he wanted, he could have done better. She's over 60, isn't she? 58. How do you know these things? Anne shrugged. I have a head for details. 6 years younger is not so much. She's not that much thinner either. Or prettier, said Anne. Pretty, Ida laughed. At our age, who's pretty anymore? Anne ran a hand through her own smooth gray hair. What I'm saying is, if a newer model was what he was going for, he sort of failed, don't you think? He traded in like a 97 Mazda for a 96 Ford. I don't know much about cars, said Anne. All our life he was like this, Ida went on, too cowardly to really improve. When he switched jobs, he only moved laterally. He never moved up. When we moved here from Gloucester, we bought this house for exactly the same amount we sold the other one for. It's never gone up in value, not a cent. The market has stayed steady for 35 years. How is that even possible? I don't know, said Anne. Ours went up. Of course it did. Everywhere has gone up except here. To be honest, I wish she had traded me in for a newer model. I wish he had the guts to make a real positive change. Ida got up on the step stool and retrieved some ancient Chef Boyardee. She was angry, she realized. How long had she been this way? How hadn't she noticed? Perhaps it was just the sort of person she was. Nothing made her angry until it had already been making her angry for years. Anne was nodding. When do you leave for Florida? Oh, Celeste talked me out of Florida, Ida said. It's Delaware now. She found a tin of sardines. "Oh, hello," she said to them. "You're staying with me." "Delaware," Anne said thoughtfully. "That's right. As soon as the cat dies, I'm out of here." Anne sipped her tea. Celeste is so fabulous. Sometimes Ida just hated Anne. At the old IBM, she sat down with a grilled cheese and sardine sandwich to browse real estate in Assisi Bay, a man-made inlet near the coast where all the ranch houses looked exactly the same: white faux clapboard siding, medium windows, and short porches that looked out over the water. A swing on every porch and a grill on every lawn. A politician's promise, the American dream. The Condo Association website featured corporate-style headshots of all the residents and a mission statement promising something about community, something about wildlife conservation. Among the bylaws was a rule against house cats. Apparently, the population of feral cats had already taken its toll on half a dozen native species. The woodfinch was suffering. The star-nosed swamp rat was legitimately endangered. She looked out the window for her own animal. The shadows were long in the yard. It was almost autumn, and the monarch butterflies were passing through, as they did every year, on their way from Canada to Mexico. One had paused to rest on the windowsill. Its wings opened in a leisurely way, then closed again. There was the cat, skulking under the patio furniture. He used to be a sweet animal, didn't he? She recalled Celeste napping on the couch as a teenager, the cat curled like a furry black cushion in the crook of her knees, purring loudly. Dying was making him surly and weird. She watched him watch a squirrel dart in its spastic way across the lawn. Used to be, he'd go wild over a squirrel. Now he slunk out from under the glass table and crawled in the other direction to hide under a shrub. I will stop there.
Thank you, Rachel. So if anybody has any questions for any of the readers, I don't see any in the chat so far. A lot was just on quotes and obviously how amazing all three of you were for reading today. Everybody's book is available either for order or pre-order in the links in the chat as well. So please support the authors and buy their books as well. If nobody has any questions, I want to announce our next reading. We're going to be back on, oh, wait. Nope, that was not a question. Anyway, we're going to be back on May 13th, 2 weeks from now. And we have three readers, Susan Ditino, John Domini, and Joseph Salvatore. So please join us again for another Guerrilla. And I want to thank not only the readers, but everybody for tonight and listening. And definitely Dixon Place for supporting as well. If you came in late and you missed a little bit of it, the whole thing is up on Dixon Place's website as well. Or if you feel like rewatching it, you can do that as well. Yes, John, absolutely ask a question.
Well, just our last reader, Rachel. If I understand correctly, you're switching off between short story and novel, and talk about that. I don't think I've been able to do that. I'm either writing a novel or I'm writing stories.
Yeah, this is such a different process, isn't it? So when I started Self-Portrait with Boy, which is my first and only novel so far, I was so kind of like bogged down by the process. I think I really just had to write short stories to boost my own morale. So, I mean, I think that's kind of the way that I think about it. Like during the course of this incredibly long and torturous process of trying to write a novel, it's sort of helpful for me anyway, to sort of have these shorter goals that I can reach and achieve during that process. Does that make sense?
Well, I can say, I mean, yes, it makes sense. Sure. you need the reassurance that you can actually reach coherence.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's no guarantee with the novel. It's like, who knows?
I can say maybe this is relevant, that I wrote the Moviola stories kind of in reaction against the long realistic novels I was writing. They had to be, given the vision or something, it had to be these realistic stories of characters in real situations. And if somebody sets up something on page 11, I've got to mention it twice more before it really makes a difference on page 290. And I got sick of all that, and I started writing sort of free form, these Moviola stories. Is that similar?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Sort of, it seems like it's good to have a balance where if you don't know what you're doing in one capacity, you at least do know with the other project and vice versa. So you can sort of bat them back and forth. Yeah. I'm curious, Gina Marie and Leila, do you both write short stories too, or just longer projects?
I prefer to write longer projects. I've written short stories usually when I know somebody who's doing an anthology or I've been solicited to do so. But even when I try and write short stories, they come out as novels. The Parting Glass started as a short story that just got wildly out of control. And 90,000 words later, here we are. So every once in a while I give a short story a try, but they all turn into novels, so I've given up.
I sort of wish I had that problem. Sounds great.
I actually don't think I've ever written a short story, even though I know that it's a good way to like start a novel, but I don't, for some reason, I guess I get so like intensely fixated on certain storylines or characters. I just like naturally can't stop myself from making it longer, but
yeah.
So we have two other questions that just came in. The first is from Andrew Lloyd Jones, and he has a question to the readers, but also to everybody, any writers. What have you learned either about yourself or in general since the lockdown started? So that's open to whoever wants to answer. Go ahead, Leila.
for me,
Oh, I thought it came up. No, you don't have to. No.
I can go. What I've learned is that, like, I mean, for me personally, I just have not been able to write or read during this time. So I've learned, I guess, that it really, for me, like getting in that writing mind space has just so much more to do with like where you are mentally rather than how much time you have available, because it's just really hard right now. We have like as much time as we need to write, but when your head's not there, it just doesn't help for me.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. I've had a really hard time. I've been shipping, normally I read like a novel a week, and I've been in quarantine, I think, for 52 days now, and I'm still working on the same novel that I've been reading since I started quarantine, which is so weird for me. So my comfort thing, I'm also in grad school in an Irish studies program. And so when I need to chill out, I dive into really, really granular research. So I read census data. I've been reading census data from the 19th century, like nonstop for the past 3 weeks. And it is bizarrely soothing, like to the extent where I dream that I'm reading the census data from the 19th century. Like name, place of birth, age, married, have you married within the year? What's your property value? And like, my capacity to absorb all of this like weird, granular, incredibly boring data is just expanded, and I don't know what happened to my brain.
I feel like I kind of identify with that. Like, I'm not reading census data. That sounds incredibly soothing, but I have been, like, to be totally honest, reading the dictionary. I'm 30 weeks pregnant right now, and we like haven't settled on a name for the kids, so I just I've been literally reading the dictionary in my free time, just like going through and finding words that I like or wasn't familiar with and trying them out as names. It's like it's a weird thing, but I guess it's like my coping mechanism at the moment. But yeah, it's hard to concentrate.
Sorry to cut you off.
No.
I also I've always been a news junkie too, and I read frequently disturbing news because I have a Middle Eastern background, so I'm always reading about wars and stuff and can't stop myself. But this is the first time ever that I can't read the news. I've totally unplugged because it's just it just hits in a different way. That's another thing I've learned too.
So we have a question directly for Gina Marie. This is from Deidre Collins. Do you intend to continue using all the historical research you've done for this book in any future projects, or do you think you'll move on to other historical moments?
Great question. Both. So, I mean, I did a lot of research on Irish immigration in the 19th century, just throughout the 19th century. I'm currently finishing edits on a book that takes place in the middle of the famine. So a lot of the information I did in researching this book is still very relevant there. I do plan to write other books that explore different moments in Irish history. My whole niche is I write historical fiction about Irish women in the diaspora, specifically queer and non-binary women. Throughout different points in history. So I did a lot of research sort of about what the experience of queer and non-binary women has been historically, specifically erasure. And that's a theme that will probably come up again and again and again. Just in terms of the general life within various aspects of the Irish diaspora is something that will come up again and again in my work as well. So those are all different elements of things that I've researched. But my favorite part, my favorite thing that we'll just keep coming back to is I love life below stairs. Somebody really kindly described my novel, The Parting Glass, as Downton Abbey meets Gangs of New York, which I really liked, aside from being really pithy and oh yeah, that does work. I was a Downton Abbey watcher, and I was always much more interested in the servant stories than the above stairs stories. So I've done a lot of research and read a lot of firsthand accounts of what life was like for servants in everything from a big house, like a Downton Abbey style estate, to a maid of all work for, a mildly affluent shopkeeper and his family. I'm really interested in exploring those stories. So that's something that I spent a lot of time researching, that I'm still researching. Actually, that's what my census work is on right now. And I hope to continue to use that.
Cool. We have a question from Alice Kaltman. Alice asks, before COVID brain set in, what is or was your next writing project? And this is to everybody.
Mine was actually a piece that kind of would work well for this moment because it's a modern take of the ancient myth of Isis and Osiris, but the main character is this really strange and isolated character who lives in a closet, and it's kind of surreal. So I feel like it might get good to get back into that at this time. But yeah, I'm excited for that project. It's a weird one.
I'd love to know more about that at some point, because I was working on a novelization of a myth as well. It was the Myth of Persephone. And I got pretty far into it. And then around, I think, December, I needed my character who was the CEO. I had the Demeter character was the CEO of a global agriculture conglomerate, because all of the gods were these 1%ers. And I needed her to get stuck somewhere and have trouble getting back to her daughter. And I had her stuck in China, and around that time these reports started coming out about this virus in Wuhan, and I was like, oh, perfect, I'll just, you know, have her quarantined in this hotel in Beijing. Like, fast forward 3 months later, I'm like now accidentally writing a coronavirus novel, and it's all wrong, and I have to delete everything. And so that's what I was working on before this all happened, and now I'm very discouraged, and I might have to do something else.
Yeah, we should connect on that though. I mean, you're sometimes kind of torn between like how much of the actual myth to incorporate, how much is like too much overkill, but I really like it. I think it's fun to do retellings, and yeah, and this one especially, like if you know the myth of Isis and Osiris, it's about somebody who was Osiris was murdered by his enemy and cut into 14 pieces and scattered throughout Egypt. And then Isis like travels around and like finds all the pieces of his body. So it's a little odd, to put it lightly, but I just love it. And I'm like, I'm kind of excited to get back into it once I like readjust to this time. But yeah, we should talk.
Yeah.
But there's another question for you. This is from Lucia Abramovich. Can you discuss your process of writing about Egypt and Egyptians as a visitor to Egypt?
Oh, I appreciate that question. It's a very scholarly question. It was a little difficult. I did a lot of research, and I based it a lot on like my personal interactions with people there. Like there's a character, Janila, who is a refugee, and obviously I have never experienced anything close to what she has experienced, but I was able to kind of like, I worked at a refugee resettlement agency, so I think that helped a little bit in terms of like finding like what actual refugee stories are and meeting them face to face, and that kind of helped me like put a story together for that character. But I still was very hesitant, kind of. I was like hyper aware of like everything that I was saying, especially with that character, just because I so completely don't have that experience. I don't know. I still hope that I hope that I don't get like an American Dirt reception to this, but you know, I believe that everybody should be able to write about anything, truly. I just think it's a matter of like how you tell these stories, and a matter of like who gets like exalted for writing stories versus, you know, native storytellers. But yeah, I would say it was something that I was definitely hyper vigilant about, and I just did the best that I could. And I do come from a Middle Eastern background, so at least I think that helps a little bit. But you know, it was still difficult.
So I think that's it for questions, unless anyone has a last minute one that they want to plug in there. And again, I want to really thank all three of our readers, Dixon Place, and everybody for coming out tonight. It's awesome to see that we're able to still have Guerrilla, and even though we're not all there having a beer, this was pretty close. So again, thank all of you, and please order all the writers' books and support them as well. And that's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the support.
You're great.
Bye.